I'll now explain the buyer's premium. Buyer's premium is a percentage added to the bid amount accepted by the seller and paid by the buyer. An example, as I've given you earlier, is that the 10% buyer's premium, which will be referenced as BP in most information package, 10% of the bid amount would be 10% of $100,000 would be a total contract purchase price of $110,000. The broker agent receives money commission based on the bid amount, not the full $110,000 purchase price. Traditional sale commission is charged on the total amount, and if it's $110,000 and 7% is charged as the seller's fee, 7% of $110,000 would make it $7,700, which reduces the amount of money that the seller would put in their pocket. The auctioneers and auction companies use a buyer's premium. Traditionally, advertising costs are paid by the broker agent in marketing their properties that are listed. In the auction case, the seller generally pays the advertising cost. The auctioneer, marketing specialist, will get together with the seller and discuss how the property should be marketed and determine the fees, which the fees are generally paid up front by the seller. It saves the real estate agent a lot of money by having the seller take care of that marketing. This is the end of the Real Estate Auction Agent Auctioneer Alliance. All this information is testable. Feel free to review this module as many times as you wish. When you're satisfied, please continue on to the next module. In this module, we'll learn about factors for successful auction business, length of the auction process, bidding procedures. Factors for a successful auction business. As a real estate auction agent, you'll be developing your own real estate auction business. Your job, your passion, will be to educate your client about how the auction process works as an alternative to the traditional method of selling. This will help the client to determine if the auction process is good for them. Remember, this is a soft sell. Let them know that you work with a professional and experienced auction firm. Let them know that you are a professional real estate auction agent and this is what you do. Educate the seller as to the desirability of the property. Educate the seller in selecting the correct type of auction for them and their needs. It may be absolute auction, reserve auction, or a subject to confirmation auction. Educate and inform them about the aggressive marketing which comes with the auction method of selling. Aggressive because your seller, with your help, will determine the exact date and time on sale. You and your auction company will immediately begin an advertising campaign which will assist in getting the property sold on that date. The advertising campaign has to be aggressive. As a professional real estate auction agent, your job will be to keep the seller educated and informed throughout the auction process. This includes follow-up after the auction day, up until closing, and then you can follow up with referrals. Three of the greatest factors for a successful auction business are consistent and persistent information, training, and education. As a real estate auction agent, we will provide you with market conditions, updates, case studies, and training via internet video. This will give you a guide to creating a successful real estate auction business. Best part, we have designed these updates to count towards your continual education. We will provide you video seminars via laptop, iPhone, BlackBerry, so you'll be informed wherever you are. How long does the process take? The seller sets the terms. Once the seller decides to go forward, the process takes about 4 weeks to auction day. Advice from the auction company determines how we're going to market it and the process and what the instructions will be to the seller when people stop by their house to take a preview of it prior to the auction day. The whole process is 30 to 60 days from beginning to end to the closing. Closing can be extended. Normally it's 30 days, but it can go up to 60, 90, or 120 days depending on the seller's needs, and that's what's determined by you, the real estate auction agent, at the meeting with the seller. And now we'll talk about the auction calendar. The auction calendar is really a fast-track timeline based on the date of the signed contract leading up to the auction date. Immediately upon signing the contract, the auction company begins marketing your property. Remember, what I'm about to talk about is not your cost. The auction company will post signs on the property, create display ads for the newspaper, create a web listing which is all done 3 weeks prior to the actual auction date. Also, a postcard mailer will be created as a brochure sent out to potential buyers of your property 2 weeks prior to that date. Virtual tour and video of the property and photo tours are posted on the web and created for information for the buyers to look at. Statistical data and information to determine if the marketing is correct is gathered and communicated to the client. All this leads up to auction day. Then we have the auction. Post-auction follow-up. After the auction, the buyer is required to increase the deposit to a total of 10% of the purchase price within 3 days of the auction. We then review the HUD settlement sheet on behalf of the seller because in a traditional selling, the buyer will split the costs with the seller. In the auction contract, the seller pays no transfer costs of any other costs associated with closing this property. This includes closing costs are the responsibility of the buyer. That is, all the costs associated with transferring this property from the seller's name to the buyer's name is paid for by the buyer. Normally, the seller has to retain an attorney. It may not be necessary to have that at this time. The bidding process. The auctioneer will arrive 1 hour prior to the auction to allow bidders to be able to walk through the property for one last final look. They are all gathered out front of the property and a welcome is given, welcome them to the auction sale, and then the terms and conditions are read. The copy of the contract is read to them so they'll be familiar with what they're going to be signing once the house has been declared sold. Makes additional announcements about the property, other details that may come up as information that was not in the information packet. Inform the bidding audience as to the seller's instructions on how the process is going to begin, whether the bid is a reserve auction or an absolute auction. The crowd is then asked if they have any questions about the bidding process or about the property. Those questions are answered, and then the auction begins. This is where the iconic chant begins. The chant is melodic and rhythmic sound which excites the crowd and gets their attention. The chant rises above the normal crowd noise and keeps the attention on the auctioneer and the bid. We will explain that in another module. Your client and the bidders are now in the middle of an auction. This is what separates the traditional method of selling from the auction. As a real estate auction agent, your immediate goal has been met. Now the auctioneer does his part, accepts bids until active bidding stops and the auction is recessed. Once the auction is recessed, he goes inside to discuss with the seller the results of all the people that are interested in the property that have bid on that specific date and time. The true market value of the property is realized and the bidder has the confidence that there is just paid just one increment more than the other bidders. Now, as you, the real estate auction agent, can confidently report to the seller that what was bid is the true value of his property. You ask the seller, except in an absolute auction, if this is the amount that allows them to move on in their life. Is it acceptable? If it is, the auctioneer will go back out in front of the crowd and say to them that the auction is going to be final. Are there any last bids to be given before he declares sold? Note, many people expect to hear the word sold in a subject to confirmation or reserve auction.